think we'll move directly into our next session that we're having at the moment, still continuing the conversation around what the climate transition looks like, what the energy mix involved in that looks like, what sort of investments are needed to actually make that a reality for a lot of us right across the African continent. And for that, we're going to have a very interesting spread of individuals to talk about these issues, both from the policymakers' perspective, the energy industry's perspective, and also from the financiers' perspective. I'd like to introduce to the stage at the moment Patrick Dupont. He's from BCG. He's a senior partner and a managing director at that particular institution for a presentation on what exactly we should expect. Patrick, are you here? I don't think those are working. Hang on.
And do you have the? No, I think it works.
Okay.
And
No,
do you have the clicker for the slides?
We will get you that in a bit. Though you can just start with the basic cliff notes.
Okay. So good morning. I will do a quick presentation to set the scene for this panel on energy transition. Wanted to remind few key facts. I'm sure most of you in the room know those facts. But I've just tried to remind some of the key figures about energy and the climate transition in Africa. And then I will talk about the COP process, what Africa did achieve at COP28, what Africa did not achieve at COP28, and what will be the priorities for the ongoing climate negotiations. So I don't know who is moving the slides so we can be, as any consultant, I'm a bit lost. If I don't get my slides, I get panicked very, very fast. Okay, and this is, okay, great. So let's put back. Okay, so here we are. So few key figures to set the tone. So when we talk about a fair climate transition, we need to be holistic about how we approach the problem, especially in the case of Africa. And it all starts with energy access. We cannot talk about the fair climate transition without, mentioning what you probably all heard, which is the 600 million Africans who do not have access to electricity or to clean cooking opportunities. So we cannot have a discussion without talking about climate access, which is not only energy access for everyone, but it's also the energy demand to industrialize Africa. The first one. The second one you need to talk about is adaptation and resilience. As you know, Africa will be the most impacted continent. More than half of the countries which will be most impacted by climate change are localized in Africa. So that's extreme temperature, sea level rise, and probably most importantly, the impact of droughts on agricultural yields. So again, the discussion, the conversation is really about investing in adaptation and resilience. And then there is a third part, which is, there will be millions of jobs, billions of investments in the green industries. 60% of the world's solar reserves are in Africa, only 1% of the production today. There is massive opportunities that obviously solar, green energies, green hydrogen, and others. And to fund that agenda, which is an extremely capital-intensive agenda, we need climate finance. And no one agrees on the figures, but you can just be sure that directionally there is a major gap of what is invested today and what should be invested to deal with the agenda in energy access, in adaptation, and in setting up green jobs and green industries. Important to mention on the energy access. There is no single example in the world of a country that has managed to develop without raising its electricity consumption. The correlation on the left, you don't need to look at all the figures, all the data points, all the countries, but there is a clear correlation. And so we cannot pretend that Africa will industrialize without increasing its electricity consumption. And so it has to be a starting point in the conversation. You see it when you plug all the countries. You see it also on the right when you plug the growth path of a number of countries. Here it's Vietnam and Korea. There is a clear correlation between how GDP is growing and how electricity consumption can grow. So we can probably optimize, but at the end of the day, Africa will need more energy and more electricity. So how do we see the priorities for Africa? We see really three big buckets. The first one is around energy access, but how do we build low carbon development paths? Low carbon doesn't mean net zero development paths, it needs low carbon development paths. So you need to understand what is your starting point, where will be energy demand by macro sectors in power, in transport, in agriculture, industry, buildings, and just build your plan that needs to be in line with the Paris Agreement, but also agree, acknowledge the specific situation of Africa in terms of the history of climate emissions and the needs to develop and industrialize and to create the jobs. Then the second part is really to invest massively in climate adaptation resilience. As I said, there is the huge gap in investments, but we need to really understand very analytically what will be the consequences of climate change, what are the climate scenarios, leveraging AI modeling tools, what does it mean in terms of impact on agriculture, impact on coastal areas, impact on yields, and then to have a sectoral approach for each sectors. What do we need to do by 2030, 2040, 2050 to get prepared to the reality of climate change, which again will be mostly around water and agriculture. There is also a number of coastal areas which will be impacted by sea level rise. There is the issue of extreme temperature and climate events. There are the, you know, if someone can turn off the, that would be nice. And the extreme climate events like inundations and so on. But if we had to synthesize, that's mostly about reduced water in semi-arid zones that will create hundreds of millions of people in very difficult situations. And if you really think about the consequence globally of climate change, this is probably the single biggest one. It's how do we deal with semi-arid areas which will lose their agricultural productivity, and that's where we need to invest massively. And then, transversally, how do we deliver green economic growth? Massive investment opportunity in green hydrogen and others, a lot of jobs to be created, and so this needs to be very high in the agenda. And how do we make sure that the technology development do happen in Africa? So let me talk about COP. I'm not sure you can read. I hope you can read. I will just comment, but what happened at COP27 and COP28? COP27 was not a very big COP, but a lot of the Africa priorities were mentioned and were discussed at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. COP28 was a much more impactful COP, but then the Africa agenda was a bit not really addressed. So the first one is loss and damage. No, it's been a long-standing ask by the Global South, and in particular in Africa. There's been some successes. The fund was established during COP27 and then operationalized at COP28 with about $800 million early pledges. Then outstanding, or the negative side of it, is it's ridiculously small. So we agreed on the framework, we agreed on the principle. The reality is that the 800 million is the drop in the ocean of the loss and damage incurred by Africa, and so that needs to be addressed in the next COPs. The second one was energy access and mitigation. I think there is, you know, what Africa wants is a fair process to accelerate unbated coal phase down, but it's also how do we deal with the subsidy phase out. A number of positives here. There is the need to take care of the starting situation and the priorities of the continent, which and what equitable transition means in Africa. But the means of implementation and the fundings required is still under discussion. On adaptation, I think the biggest claim from Africa and from the Global South is how do we make sure we set up a framework? How do we make sure that we increase investments? So a framework has been established, the global goal on adaptation, but the equivalent of the 1.5 degrees for adaptation still needs to be discussed and agreed, so there is no quantitative targets, and there is still a lack of funding. And on the last one, on the finance, I think this is where there is a lot of, obviously, mismatch between the promises since COP15 and today, that the promises of fundings to support the global energy transition is still far from being reached. So that will be the biggest topic that will be discussed in the next COPs. We are still not there. The MDB reforms have been engaged. There are a number of discussions about how do we increase the investments in the green transition, but we are still not there. I'm sure Si Mohamed from IFC, you will be talking about that. So, last one, what do we need to focus on for COP29 and the next COPs? The first one is what we call the new collective quantified goal, the new $100 billion. How do we make it real, relevant, and how do we create more instruments for blended finance to increase investments in the transition? There is a discussion around debt restructuring, because it's not only about getting more investments, is how do we do when most of the countries cannot invest public investment because of the debt level and the debt service, and then to have credible transition investment plans, both mitigation and adaptation, which are the core of the discussions to engage into a meaningful and a positive transition for Africa. So that's it for me. I will leave the floor. I hope it set up this discussion well for you to discuss some of those topics of energy access, of adaptation, and of green investments. And I'm sure we'll have a great discussion. Thank you.
Merci, Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick.
It's going to be an interesting one, because we're trying to balance so many different things. We need access to energy, but we also need to develop our economies. And some of the energy sources we have access to, whether we like it or not, tend to be a bit on the polluting side. But nonetheless, we have a lot of work ahead of us. 600 million Africans need access to energy from the grid. How do we do it? While industrializing, while building the next set of billion-dollar companies right across Africa. I'll explore that in detail with the panelists coming up on stage right now. I'd like to start with Mike Sangster, as a Senior Vice President for Africa at Total. Please come up to the stage. We'll also have Mohamed Guled. He's a Vice President of Industries at the International Finance Corporation. Looking forward to having that discussion around where the money comes from and whether your lending decisions might be impacted by trade agreements or the lack thereof. Riyad Mazur is the Minister of Trade and Industry for the Kingdom of Morocco. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on exactly how Morocco is going to industrialize, right here, going to industrialize in an environment where environmental policy made elsewhere might affect your ability to invest in the country. Also, we have Alexandre Barrot. He's the Vice Prime Minister of the Transition for the Republic of Gabon. Please join us on stage. Okay. Minister Riyad, I want to start with you.
Why me?
Why not you? Morocco is in an interesting position because a big chunk of Morocco's trade happens with your neighbors right across the Mediterranean, the EU. And yet the EU also has the carbon border adjustment mechanism that's coming into place. And one of the concerns that I hear when I talk to policymakers in my side of the continent, in East Africa and Southern Africa, is we want the capital, we want to invest, but will anyone actually come and invest if their produce is going to get hit with an extra carbon tax when they're sending it to the EU? How are you dealing with that?
Well, the good news is we are blessed by God in Morocco and in Africa, having the potential to produce green energy at a low price and to use this green energy as a competitive asset. Morocco did the choice 30 years ago to go green. Why? Because we were hit severely by price changes in the energy. And it affected our development for more than 20 years. You know, the crisis, the oil crisis of the 70s affected our development for more than 20 years. So we had to stop everything. We have to stop investing in education. We had the IMF telling us to stop everything. So we learned from it, and it was a heavy lesson. And we decided to go green because we are blessed by wind, we are blessed by sun. Technology was expensive at that time, but today
it's a very different story.
We can produce electricity at the lowest price. And for us, it's not only an opportunity to be more competitive, but it's an opportunity to raise our market share because our competitors cannot compete.
But that being said, I mean, parts of Morocco's energy is still coming in from some fossil fuels, right? And if I'm walking into, for the sake of argument, Waitrose, 5 years from now, and I'm buying olive oil from farmers in Morocco, right, from those lovely farms that you have in Marrakesh, what are the odds that they're going to get hit with a carbon tax?
Well, olive oil is not impacted by the CBAM. You know, CBAM will impact 6 commodities.
For now.
For now. And the transition is accelerating in Morocco. Now we have in our electricity mix, production base, we are at more than 40%, which is renewable, going to 52, going to 64, and with the hydrogen project, probably going to over 100% of our needs. So we are going green at a fast pace, and now that it's very competitive, it will turn green very quickly. So for now, we are ready. Our commodities that are impacted by the CBAM for the export are ready. We have green steel, we have green cement, etc., etc. The rest, industry, automotive industry, is net zero or close to it. So the automotive industry will not be impacted. Medium-sized companies, we are making the transfer. That means we are supporting them in going green. It's a profitable investment supported by the government, and the paybacks are after 2-3 years. So the journey is very positive for us.
Vice Prime Minister, I want to come to you. Gabon is in an interesting position because as an East African who comes from a country that is 70% arid, fly over Gabon, fly over large parts of Central Africa, it's green. You've got massive amounts of land coverage everywhere. And the thing that always strikes me is somewhat frustrating is enormous chunks of Central Africa, Western Africa, huge forest cover, but countries like yours are not being paid for the environmental services that they provide to the world. How do we change that?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you.
But I would like to say that this is an extremely important issue for us, and congratulate the Rwandan authorities for the good organization of this conference and the strong leadership of President Kagame, who has created the condition for this successful with the organization. Coming to your question now, je voudrais dire que
I would like to say that we have to consider things in their perspective, and we are not amongst those who participate to pollution in tremendous ways. Because when we have to pay to reduce pollution, we are being requested, and we understand perfectly the need to fight climate change. However, it is not. It is quite asymmetric, because we have to be fully taken into account in those discussions of COP27, COP28, and even now COP29. So we are talking about issues as if we had all contributed in the same manner to that change. But the reality is that there are countries such as mine, Gabon, that are participated to maintaining their forests and with a lot of courage have invested in energy systems that are less polluting, such as hydroelectric energy. And indeed, we have 98 forest coverage, but that does not come without sacrifice. We refuse to deforest systematically so that we can maintain our vegetation surface or coverage. Now, from there, we do agree, because we are in a world whereby we are all going to lose if we don't move together towards the achievement of our objectives. But this should not be, this kind of arrangements, as it has been said previously, because all the promises that were made, all the commitments are not being achieved. Because we have needs in terms of energy, but we also have needs to reduce poverty, to satisfy, basic needs. And all this requires resources. And when we have to deliver on our commitments in Bonn, we don't see much coming. Therefore, I believe that this is one of the topics whereby we have to reflect together and in a global way, first of all, in Africa, so that we can come up with a common strategy, so that we can come with it at the table where decisions are being made. Because those who are most polluting, those who are using fossil fuels, do not make the necessary efforts, in regards with the different objectives of the different COPs. So that is actually what we would like to, that's how we would like to pose these issues, because we don't want to come out of this with just slogans when we say that we are going to reduce, fossil energies, but we need to give ourselves the means to do so. And we have created 13 national parks in Gabon so that we could preserve the wildlife and forests. And Gabon is actually considered as a net space for carbon. So we have the right, together with our different neighbors, countries of the Congo Basin. As you all know, this is actually the next reserve after Amazon. We have contributed towards that. So we have our specific features in Africa, and we do agree so that we can integrate technology. We agree to increase productivity, but everyone has to play their part.
We go to these COPs and we say what we want, we say what we need to get done, but there's always that gap, isn't there, between what is said and what we actually get at the end of those events. Mike, I want to come to you. Total, active investor. Total Energy. Because I remember that the first time your comms guys actually mentioned this years ago, it was, no, we're not just a fossil fuel company anymore. We actually do a few other things beyond that. But I'm going to pedal back the conversation a little bit. Looking back, this was pre the invasion of Ukraine. There's all this talk about how oil and gas might end up being a stranded asset. And we've seen in some instances, like one of the big projects in Uganda, it's been a real struggle to raise the cash needed to get that pipeline built. Is that still the case? Has it changed?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, I mean, you're right. I think we are, I think firstly we are Total Energies, and it wasn't just a change of, it wasn't just a marketing exercise, a change in name. So we're investing heavily in new energies as well as in oil and gas. And if you look at our global capital expenditure, about $5 billion per year is in new energies. And I think we're one of the largest private producers of solar power, with a target to get to 100 gigawatts. So we're trying to balance the, I think it was mentioned during the presentation, access to energy is key for economic growth. So on the one hand, we have to meet the demand, and there's still demand for oil and gas, coming from the world, 102 million barrels per day at the moment, and it maybe will continue to increase in the short term. And the second stage, we are actually, investing in the new energy so that we can transition as a company. The Uganda project, I was there myself a couple of weeks ago. It's going really well. I think, we're drilling with 3 rigs, we're taking a lot of care of the environment, and as far as the pipeline is concerned as well, the steel is all arriving in Tanzania, and construction is about to start. It's clear that, European financial institutions are now very reticent to invest in oil and gas projects in Africa, which I think is a shame, but we do find other ways to finance the projects. I can assure everyone that the Telenga ECOP projects are moving ahead very nicely.
Can you go into detail on that? Because, we understand why, the Standard Charters, the HSBCs, and so on of this world might be reticent to invest in that project, right? You don't want to essentially have a situation like what happened in some AGMs, we're sitting here, shareholders are around, and the next thing you know, you've got some oil protesters showing up in the back of the room saying, stop all investments in oil, and all that sort of thing happening. But moving forward, if that's our baseline, where do companies like yours then find capital?
Well, a company like Total Energies, we tend to finance most of our investments with equity. It's only for a very small number of projects that we actually go to the financial market. So I think given the size of our company, given our balance sheet, we don't generally need to go to the market for finance, because we can fund it from our own revenues, which is what we do in most of our projects in Africa. So it's not having a huge impact on us.
Mohammed, industrial investments. We've been singing this song for the last 24 hours. We need to industrialize. We want to get industries built. But in the event, speaking up on what Mike is talking about here, the capital might be there, but some banks will not be willing to invest in industries if they feel this is going to run into trade problems with carbon taxes in some markets. Maybe this project is not necessarily viable. How then do you actually make the case for investments?
Thank you very much. And I think Patrick covered quite a bit in terms of setting the scene for what the challenges are. I think my colleagues in the panel have also touched on a number of the things, but when it comes to financing, let's be clear what the challenges are. Carbon taxes is not the main challenge. Financing these investments is a much, much bigger challenge. And financing investments in renewable energy, whether it's generation, distribution, or transmission, requires a lot of investments. Having said that, investors are agnostic, frankly, where they invest. At the end of the day, what are they looking for? They are looking for predictable regulatory framework and legal policy and legal frameworks. They are looking at transparent regulations. They're looking for ability to be able to invest, knowing that they can raise money both domestically and internationally for tenors that are longer term. And they are looking at overall visibility when you are talking about investments that you are looking at 15, 20, 25 years. These are not investments that are short-term investments. These are not portfolio flows where money is coming from north to south to invest in the stock market and you exit when you are not. This is a long-term commitment, and long-term commitment requires very predictable macro, regulatory, and fiscal.
You say that investors are agnostic; they just want a return, and to some extent, at least from some of the investment bankers that I've spoken to, that thesis holds. But if you're running Standard Bank, for example, which has taken a fair bit of flack given the involvement with the ECOP project, at some point they'll be like, yeah, this probably just isn't worth it for us, right? So, from where you sit, as in IFC. How do you manage that evolving concern? Because some banks will just be like, nah, this doesn't work for us.
The fact of the matter is that since 2010, we have financed 22 gigawatts of renewable energy. And a lot of this money came from other investors other than IFC. So we've been able to mobilize investors to come with us. I can tell you, in Morocco, we have partnered with OCP on a 202 megawatt concentrated solar. We have put almost 1 gigabyte last year into Egypt through 2 different projects in the solar space. So raising funding and even raising concessional finance to close the viability gap in certain geographies is not the challenge. The challenge is getting everything else in line so that investors have visibility on how their investment is going to perform.
All right, and I want to go back to Minister Riyad on this, because Morocco's got 25 gigawatts, if I remember correctly, of wind potential just along your coastline, right, around Casablanca, moving up north. There are other countries across the continent that I could point to that have enormous renewable potential. Kenya's got 10 gigawatts of potential geothermal, for instance. But finding the money, Mohammed's telling me the capital is there. Okay, how do we deploy it at scale in Morocco?
Well, let's tell some truths. Since the beginning of this journey, we were waiting for green bonds, green capital. There is no free green lunch.
And there's no green low-cost lunch either.
It's the same money. It's that it just needs greener investments. 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, 3 years ago, before the Ukraine war, you couldn't find a penny. You couldn't find a penny to support a non-renewable project, even to ensure an actual coal plant, power plant. So it's the same money that's that is going green, with the same conditions. The former conditions were the same, like you said, stability, predictability, etc., with a bigger capex, because it's capex more intensive when you invest in renewable. So it's the same money. There is no free lunch. It's a lie. The 100 billions that we're expecting in every COP that will come and flow because we're preserving forests, because we're doing our part, or we're doing our job, does not exist. Or we can get small part of it. It will not change our lives. And I have my predecessor that was always telling me, or telling investor, can you count? And the answer was yes. And his answer was, count on yourself. So the idea is about structuring the project to get the financing, making the condition to get the financing, having the right ability to deploy and to execute a project. It's all the same. It just has a new color.
Doesn't it frustrate, and this is directly to both ministers on the panel, because we go to these COPs, we have conversations around the $100 billion that you mentioned, which never eventually shows up. We talk about loss and damages. And we say, well, we'll probably set up a nice little $800 million set of funding that will kick this off. Still not clear how countries will benefit from it. Still not clear which countries can actually tap into it. You're being told, don't use gas. We're not going to fund it. We're not going to provide the capital. But the same countries that are telling you this are opening coal mines. They're investing in oil and gas. Doesn't it frustrate you every time you show up for these COP events? And how then do we turn that frustration into productive policy for our countries?
Oui, tout à fait.
Yes, we have there is a paradox that we want to encourage clean energy, and we continue to invest, if I can say, in fossil fuel with risks to aggravate the issues. But the situation is at a different level because we are talking about public-private partnerships, whereby the ISF can find out modalities to invest in energies, in clean energy. Now, we have also these expectations in regards with funding. Well, it's not us who have invited these issues of carbon credit, carbon tax. You know, we cannot say that we are preserving our forests. We have, we have development needs. When we are faced with a certain need, the funding does not come forward. The funding that was promised globally. So this is another mechanism. But nonetheless, we are committed. We have objectives to reduce, to favor, an energy mix with clean energy. So we are doing our part, but we are expecting from the international community to do their part as well. So the polluters should commit themselves so that they may have, fair compensation. So I think this is equity. But all that is being done to improve, the macroeconomic framework with our president, President Oligui Nguema, who took things in charge for the last 9 months, we have seen the change in governance to improve the use of resources, to invest in clean energy. And by the same time, there is, an infrastructure gap that we find when we came in, and we need to, fill in. So every country has got its own specificities. Therefore, we need to talk with the same voice with the oil exporters, the oil sector, Total Energies. We know that Total Energies have refocused their strategy. We know very well because we have some partnership with them in Gabon in that area. So they're investing in a hydro dam to solve the issues. We were talking about it a couple of hours ago. So this is not something, we are not really judging them or judging any other company who are in that area, but everyone does not have the same will as Total Energies. Therefore, we as South countries, we need to talk or to speak with one and same voice because we don't have the same comparative benefits. There are those who are just discovering oil and gas today, so they are faced with needs. We cannot tell them to stop everything that they need to do so that they can reorganize to achieve their objectives. So they need a mix. So I think, our colleague has made a presentation. He introduced something. We need to have objectives by 2030, 2040, 2050. So I believe this is important, and we cannot, because we are not at the same level. So if we want to be efficient, for those COPs have to take into account the different situations.
You agree?
For sure. Each country has its own situation, each country has its own journey of development, and each country has its own needs in terms of investment and infrastructure. Regarding all this, I think each country has also its own responsibility and sovereignty in structuring its journey of development. And we were and we are in the same boat, because we were looking at all these conditions, all these constraints as negative impact to our path or our journey for development. And we were expecting, I made a team to structure the flux of these beautiful green promises that were supposed to come and flow to help us transform our societies. And when I say there is no free green lunch, there is no free green lunch. So we have to do it our own way. And the sustainable way is not that negative. We have a lot of opportunities to take in transforming our economy, in making it more sustainable. Need for hydrocarbons will stay. We heard Total Energy talking about that. They'll continue to invest also in developing their footprint in even Total. I was yesterday or 2 days ago in Doha, and they have a beautiful development plan in developing their gas potential. We have to do our own homeworks. We have a lot to do. Nobody will do it. Nobody will do it for us.
Does that include borrowing? Because if raising capital is an issue, right? Does that then include raising capital from domestic markets within Africa?
You don't have deep markets in Africa. Let's be honest. It does include raising capital where the capital is. The capital is in Japan, the capital is in China, the capital is in the GCC, the capital is everywhere.
True,
and is waiting, the capital is available.
But the reality is that some of this capital will be held back based on political grounds. We're seeing that already happening with
Just
European
make the
banks.
right project to attract the capital, and the project, if it's not sustainable, you won't have capital. It's as simple as that. Make the project that is adapted to the capital you need to raise.
D'accord. En Afrique, il n'y a pas de...
Well, in Africa, there is no such thing as capital market. I agree. But this is one of the topic of our forum. We need to organize ourselves and develop capital markets that are regional instead of having our savings elsewhere in, fiscal paradise. And also, we do have a responsibility for the sound governance when we are partners, and that we sign partnerships which are asymmetric sometimes. We need to review that. So we need to review that. We need to agree. We need to play our role. And this is the sense of the actions that are taken today that we have in Gabon. We are looking forward to improving governance, to fight against climate change. As Minister of the Plan, we have this responsibility to make these priorities, to be aligned with the regulations. We will play our role, But we need to have a look at the countries of the South, which are more ambitious, and we need to copy them and look for inspiration to improve our savings, our resources, and I believe that there are ways to do it in Africa. But the regulations, our environment needs to be more attractive. We need to work hand in hand. We need to work on the business environment. We also need the countries of the North to consider the question of trade, because you can speak about financing, you can speak about debt, but I'm not hearing about trade from you. I'm not hearing about opening your market up, to us. I'm not hearing about lowering the protectionist barriers. I'm not hearing you speaking about this, and this is very important. So this is the things that we need to do at a larger scale. And if we do that, and if we are able to exchange goods, if we are able to raise our market share in Africa and in the world, we will have resources.
Just very quickly, maybe to talk a little bit about domestic capital markets and the importance of that to not just financing the energy transition, but also generally financing economic development. Savers in most of these markets are also very rational people. At the end of the day, they look at what's available to them in terms of investment instruments and asset classes where they can put money in, whether it's the equity markets, the debt markets, or money markets. If they don't have that, then we should not really make them responsible for going and seeking instruments to invest in cross-border. So it is our responsibility. It is every country's responsibility to develop their capital markets so that the excess savings in the economy or the surplus savings in the economy can go into attractive investments, and the instruments to capture those are available, and the market works, and you know, this is how you retain capital.
I walked into a chicken and egg question, haven't I? Because we're talking about savings pools and capital pools domestically, but how do you develop those savings pools when incomes are low and the jobs aren't there and the manufacturing isn't there?
So today what you have is a lot of savings that leave Africa and go. So for a start, before you even think about small savers, if that capital can actually get the proper investments in the country, in the markets, with the right instruments that are available, a lot of that doesn't have to leave the country. So it's not really, it's not what I would call capital flight. It's what I might call lack of opportunities to invest in products that are available domestically.
Indeed. Minister Riyad, I'll come to you in a bit, but Mike, we've left you out for a bit.
It's very pleasing to hear the two honourable ministers on the panel recognising the job that Total Energy is doing, so I don't need to say anything.
I mean, they're doing your marketing for you. But ultimately, in your case, as Total Energy, and I'll put the same question to you that I put to Guido a little earlier, given all the constraints, right, that we've spoken about, you're operating across a continent where about 19 economies are either at high risk of debt distress or they're already in debt distress. There's some very interesting oil and gas plays all over the place. Mozambique is a particularly fantastic one. Your CEO is going to be talking about that, I think, later on in the day. What's your investment outlook, at least over the medium term, across Africa? Because at some point, we can sit here and say things are not working, granted, but Total's still investing across the continent.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk about oil and gas for a minute, I mean, Africa is very important for Total Energies and will remain to be very important. You know, we're very active producing today in Angola, Gabon, Nigeria, Congo. We have projects in Uganda, Tanzania, and Mozambique. And we have exploration, we're drilling exploration wells in Namibia and hopefully soon in South Africa. So
the Namibia play is pretty interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. So I mean, so we will. I mean, we see there's lots of potential in Africa. I think it will remain an important part of our business. And I think, as the Honourable Minister said, I mean, what's important for us, you know, is the stability in the fiscal regimes and the regulation in these countries. Because when we invest in oil and gas, it's maybe 8-9 years between the initial exploration well and when we get the first production. But then at the same time, because say we are a multi-energy company, we're also starting to invest in renewables in Africa as well as elsewhere in the world. And I think we have 4 solar plants at the moment in Africa, and 10 more which are under development as well. So I think we want to, you know, we have this multi-energy strategy, oil and gas and integrated power, and we want to apply that in Africa as well as in other parts of the world. It's a little bit more difficult in the renewable side in Africa, but I think it's important that we initiate that as well. And just one other point, if I may, on the financing side as well. And I think what we see, what we do is obviously we're making money at the moment from oil and gas, but that enables us to invest in some of these very capital-intensive renewables projects. So, I mean, I think if we didn't have the revenue from oil and gas today, we wouldn't have the $5 billion per year to invest in new energies.
And we're getting into the Q&A question in just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. So if you have any questions for panelists, please prepare them accordingly. But I just wanted to ask you, for details on that renewable energy investment pipeline, what does that look like over the medium term? Because you've spoken about solar, which is good, but beyond that, what else should we expect?
No, but I mean, we have a very public target to get to 100 gigawatts of solar capacity. I mean, and I think we're well on the way to achieving that. So I think that's why every year, you know, we put in place what we called renewables explorers. You know, building on our exploration heritage. In all countries, many countries, including many countries in Africa, actively looking for opportunities where we can develop new renewables projects, be it hydro, be it wind, be it solar. So I think, you know, the demand is clearly there. You know, we're generating the capital from our traditional oil and gas business. So I think we will achieve that ambition. And where we think our energy production in the next few years will grow by about 4% per year. Our oil and gas is more like 2% per year. So we're going to see an increase in our energy production from our electricity production, essentially, as part of that, let's say, just transition.
Well, I hope I eventually do live to see the day when Total is part of the financiers behind something like Grand Inga, for example. That would really be something to see. Mohammed, I want to come to you on critical minerals. We need them as part of our transition process. If you're going to have all these batteries floating around in our devices, in our cell phones, our tablets, hopefully our electric cars at some point, like some of the ones that are being produced here in Rwanda, at some point, those resources have to be dug out of the ground and processed. And one of the biggest producers of cobalt in the world is right next door, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And granted, mining it's an interesting business, but is it something that the IFC would be willing to get into?
Yes, very good question. If we are talking about industry transition and we're talking about solar and wind and we're talking about batteries and storage, minerals are not absent from there. And that is what's a big piece of the energy transition. What we do at the IFC is we do invest in the mineral space. But in doing that, we have to do it in a way that is environmentally sound and socially responsible, so that we can catalyze this for economic growth in countries through job creation, of course, through exports, through contribution to the fiscal revenues. So that is one aspect. And we have now worked in this space for a long time. We are investing as we speak in copper mining. We're investing in lithium, in graphite, all the things that are really needed for future energy.
Is that going to be scaled up over the medium term?
This is going to be also scaled up in the medium term. However, as I said, it has to be done in a way that is environmentally and socially sustainable. There's no shortcut around that. So that's one element. I think a more important element that I would add is, in the context of Africa, for a very long time, mining has happened here, and it's shipped and processed.
We dig the rocks out of the ground, ship it somewhere else.
Yeah. And sold back as a finished product. I think what we are pushing for at IFC is to see how we develop the value chains whereby some level of processing happens this, which again brings back to the initial challenge, which is for that you do need, because what you need is if you are a big battery manufacturer, you want your supply to be certain at a certain level of quality and on time. And so what you will again need is to make sure you have the right policy frameworks in place and that you have enough energy, preferably, hopefully, green energy to drive that so that you can actually green the mining space, add value, and benefit from that value add for everybody in Africa.
Indeed. Are there any questions that we have from the audience for our panelists? Any? None? Oh no, there's one at the front. So let's have a microphone up here, and then we'll take a second one to the gentleman in the back.
Hello, Philippe Michel from the CFAO group. Thanks a lot for that very insightful discussions. A number of private investors of different kinds, form and shape, have taken net zero commitment as early as 2030 for the boldest. That's 5 years from now. Does that change the sense of urgency? Not all of the countries have been as visionary as Morocco has been. And so some investors will just not be able to invest in countries which are not green compatible. How do we cope with that? Do we leave it to COP28 to fix it? Or do we get together more rapidly between the private sector and the public authorities?
Do you want to take that?
Should I? It's a difficult question, and it's a question that we're asking ourselves every day. Well, you have the chicken and the egg problematic. What's the point? How can I get financing to make my project? And financing are requiring that you are sustainable and net zero, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, whatever, to an extent. And then you have the second condition. What are my consumers or my markets requiring? Some markets are not requiring anything. Our markets in general, in the developing world, they are more flexible, even if it's getting a little bit tighter. So combining these conditions, you prepare yourself and you develop your project and you develop your investments. So country policy is important, for sure. Country conditions are important, sure, to deliver, to have a mix, to drive the energy the right way, to the right markets and to the right producer and to the right projects, and to support. But at the end of the day, it's the investor responsibility himself. And who is investing to transform, who is investing to deliver, is the private sector. Our job as government is to make the best possible condition and the best possible support, the best possible infrastructure, the best possible talents, so that they can deliver. We are not responsible of developing new capabilities to transform. Our job is to make the conditions available. And let me talk about your battery value chain. This is the right example. We are developing the global battery value chain for EV in Morocco, heavy investment, a portfolio of $45 to $50 billion to have the initial value chain in my country. Each project, and there are almost 10, the consumption of a project is equivalent to the consumption in electricity of the city of Kigali, of each project. So if we have a problem to deploy and to deliver electricity to our population, and we still have 600 million that need electricity, can you imagine the needs in electrons for each of these projects? Nevertheless, we should do it. Why? Because it generates value, it generates revenues, it generates taxes that will permit us to build and to deliver infrastructure and electricity to our population and jobs at the end of the day.
There was a gentleman with a question at the back. Yes, please.
My question is for the minister from Gabon, who spoke earlier about the free trade agreement, and to the rest of the panel, I have also a second question. Regarding the free trade agreement, sorry, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Gali Tariji, I'm from Morocco, and we are a family group that is organized around industries. We manufacture pumps, power generators, and transformers. And one of the problems we have is that we've been investing in some countries in Africa. We're inaugurating a new factory in Senegal and one next year in Côte d'Ivoire. But even a trade zone like ECOWAS, we have a problem between countries that are not always recognizing products from one country to the other and putting barriers. And that's something, if there is no awareness from governments, it'll be very difficult for a private investor to move forward. The second point is everybody wants private investors, everybody is looking for capital. There are some great investors within the African community, but very little willingness from governments to buy African. We still have many, many barriers when we have to prove ourselves, even if we have the same quality as elsewhere, to convince people to buy from Africa. And thank you.
All right, so questions around trade, the trade barrier question.
Thank you very much. I will respond. I will try to respond in English. Let me say that I fully agree with what my colleague from Morocco has said. All these environmental questions to create the condition to attract investors. And we fully agree on that, and to improve the value chain, to have more added value. For the question of our friend, you and others are most welcome in Gabon. And we are working on improving the condition. We have a budget of 3,600 billion of CFA in our plan, and there is an important part. We expect an important part coming from the private sector, and we will be delighted to go further in detail to show the opportunities. Gabon is a country of opportunities who is taking its responsibility, which is now sitting on the driving side with a strong leadership. And we expect really investors to come and find a fruitful agreement, because it is important that this is a win-win operation for those that invest, but also for the benefit of the people in the country.
Right.
So I will end by that.
And I'm sure that's a conversation that you'll continue later on in the conference. But we do have, essentially, we've hit our time limit, so you do need to wrap up the conversation. At this point, I'm sure panelists will be available for the remainder of the day for any questions and conversations you may have a little later. Ladies and gentlemen, a hand of applause, really, for our audience.